We have a crisis of participation. And I got to tell you guys, I went to a Donald Trump rally a couple nights ago. Never been to one. I had an event across the street. I saw the line of people waiting in the cold for hours. And I thought, what the heck? You know, I'm going to be a leader who actually invites people, doesn't condemn them. Met probably 50 Trump people waiting in line. Every single one of them, thoughtful, hospitable, friendly. All of them so frustrated that they feel nobody's listening to them but Donald Trump. A diverse crowd, people who had never been to a Trump event before. My party is completely delusional right now.
So the great political divide in America is largely a divide between rural America and urban America. The people that live in the countryside and in small town America tend to vote overwhelmingly Republican, and of course the major urban areas tend to lean very heavily towards the Democrat side. And if you look at what might be characterized as the bi-coastal elite, that's your wealthy, highly educated urban dwellers that live on the coast of America, they look at Trump and his supporters with contempt. They view them as bigoted rubes that are holding the rest of society back. Contrast the Trump supporters, the people that live out in the countryside, look at the coastal elite as just out of touch, impractical people. And they look at all the problems in these large urban areas that vote heavily Democrat, and they largely don't want what they got, which is why they vote the other way in mass. And it's my contention that if you don't truly understand this divide, then you don't understand the undercurrents that really drive American politics. And if you're looking for an interesting voice to help understand this divide, Victor Davis Hanson is an interesting fellow. On one hand, he's a fifth-generation farmer that lives in a very conservative part of California. People tend to think of California as an ultra-liberal state, and there's definitely the coastal areas are overwhelmingly progressive, liberal enclaves, but there's also, I suppose, like any state, there's rural areas that are actually very, very conservative. And that's where Victor Davis Hanson is from. You know, he grew up in a farming family in Selma, California, which is near Fresno, which is known as a very conservative area. But he's also a professor that taught at Sanford University, as well as Hillsdale College. So he's kind of got a foot in both worlds. You know, he lives and has his farm out in a rural conservative area, but yet he teaches in a very, very Democrat, liberal, progressive area. And that gives him a very unique perspective on things. You know, most people live and work in one area or the other, and sort of live in one bubble or the other, where he's very much what you might call an integrated human being. Like, he's a farmer, he knows how to work with his hands, he knows how to be productive that way, but he also is an intellectual. He knows how to think and wrestle with abstractions, so it's a very unique individual that way. Reminds me a little bit of Thomas Jefferson, who was a farmer on one hand, but also a very astute political philosopher on the other, very much a thinking man. And those are the most interesting people, in my opinion, because they're practical and down to earth, yet they can also think in abstractions. If all you know how to do is work with your hands, you know, you might be seen as just a grunt. And if all you know how to do is, you don't know anything about working with your hands, you don't know anything about making the earth productive or being industrious, and all you know how to do is think and read books and wrestle with ideas, well, the problem with that is you're not grounded. So you don't really have a practical knowledge base to test a lot of your ideas. So, you know, intellectuals who spend their whole lives in the four walls of a university wrestling with ideas don't have a good measure to test their ideas to see if they're actually practical in the real world. As where men like Victor Hanson have a good foundation to bridge that gap. There's a quote I've always liked that an ounce of experience is worth a ton of theory, which I take to mean that the true test of your ideas is how they work in the real world. And if all you have is theory, then you don't really have a strong basis to have a lot of confidence in your ideas about how the world works. So recently, Victor Davis was on the Mike Rowe show, and did a fair amount of exploring this idea of the rural versus the urban, how the coastal elite sees middle America, how they see, say, your average Trump supporter, and people that live outside of their bubble generally. So I thought that was interesting, and that's how I'm going to spend the rest of this video highlighting some of that commentary, giving my own thoughts. By the way, I will link the entire interview with Victor Hanson below if you want to watch the whole hour and 20 minutes. It is pretty interesting. In my video, I'm just going to highlight clips of it that I thought were particularly interesting.
About 9 years. I did come back to where I grew up, but when I was 26, I decided not to go into academia, and I just came back and farmed. And then I got back into academia at the local state university. But my point is, for most of my life, I've been going back between those two worlds. And while that other world, the academic, urban, Silicon Valley, Stanford world, was condemnatory of this type of world. And I mean, when I would talk to people about farming or Fresno, they just thought it was, one person said, I don't know how you can even live near Fresno. And then when I talked to people here, to the degree they knew about those people, and they didn't necessarily have a positive view, but they were never hypercritical. They just said, "Wow, that's neat. What's it like up there? What do you do every week?" But these people thought a fate worse than hell would be to live among people here. It was a very diverse area of Armenian Americans, Mexican Americans, Japanese Americans, poor white from Oklahoma. Now it's mostly Mexican American from the open borders, but it's odd that they are assuming the ethos and the culture of the earlier mixed, diverse communities. In other words, I don't know of a Mexican American man over 40 that is not voting for Trump, but I'd say most of their kids and their wives are not. But there's that, it's a very muscular, blue collar, it's been very good for me also, because I remember when I came home from graduate school, I was very happy that I told my father, who was a farmer and a junior college, I said, I passed my Italian, German, and French. I attached my Greek and Latin composition. I only have 9 more exams. And he said, did you ever learn how to wire the 220 raisin dehydrator like I asked you? And I said, Dad, I'm a full-time student. And he said, I know you are. And my dad had actually gone to college, and but he said, I need the raisin dehydrator wired, and I don't want it to burn up. So all of the skills that I thought people thought were very important were not important here. It was, can you drive a tractor for 9 hours and not take out a vine? Can you weld? Can you do rudimentary plumbing? Can you prune trees? And over there, it was, nobody thought, not only nobody knew they didn't even know they existed. So and then the vocabulary of disparagement. So I started looking at these adjectives: clingers, irredeemables, deplorables, dregs, chumps, hobbits, crazies. Those are words that John McCain even used, whom I liked. Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Joe Biden. They have a...
Of course, he's referencing the disparaging way Democrats and the coastal elites talk about people like me, people that think and live like I do. They call us clingers and deplorables, this, that, and the other thing. Of course, the latest thing is weirdos. They call people like J.D. Vance and Trump weirdos, and by implication, the people that support them weirdos.
People have been beaten down so long, and they feel so betrayed by government.
Well, it's not surprising then that they get bitter and they cling to guns or religion or antipathy towards people who aren't like them, and a way to explain their frustrations.
You know, to just be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. And unfortunately, there are people like that. And he has lifted them up.
Some of what he and his running mate are saying, well, it's just plain weird.
These guys are just weird. That's who they are.
As weird and creepy as J.D. Vance.
Super weird idea from J.D. Vance.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's quite weird. They're just plain weird.
Just plain weird.
Just plain weird.
That stuff is weird. They come across weird, and then they start being weird. Yeah, they're weird.
Being a really weird.
He's such a weirdo.
Donald Trump and his weirdo running mate, they're weird. Deeply and profoundly weird.
I have a question about just obviously, you know, running and being in politics. Do you take what sometimes the media says about you personally? Like, I don't know if you saw that. There was like a whole clip of like people calling you weird. Did you see that? It was like a clip of like,
I certainly know the Kamala campaign wants to call me weird. But
yeah, but I'm wondering why that word. And because like it was on like it was like clipped on like 1,000 different media outlets. Like they were all using the same word.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's like something they focus grouped and decided to push on us. I mean, like I'm a pretty normal guy. I've got a wife and kids, and I like to hang out and, you know, watch football. And
so my critique of the left-wing ideologues is that during the political campaigns, they're all about demonizing the other side, calling them a bunch of rubes and bigots. And then if they lose the election, of course, it was Russian interference, or they have some scapegoat that they blame their failure on, and they continue to demonize their counterparts. But then if they win an election, they immediately call for unity, and they want to be the uniters. Why would the people that you just accused of being a bunch of bigots want to unite with you? To the contrary, if my candidate loses in November, I'll probably just go back to clinging to my guns and religion and palling around with my deplorable friends as we weirdly work and try to provide for our families like a bunch of weirdos, I guess. And while I'm doing that, I'll just wait for the Democrats to fail like they always do. I'll just wait for them to screw up the areas they govern even more. I won't expect the border to be more secure. I won't expect them to fix inflation. In fact, they'll probably make the problem worse. But I'm certainly not going to be in the mood to come together and get along with those kinds of people. To the contrary, I'm just going to try to thrive in spite of them. And again, waiting for them to fail because I believe their governance is incompetent.
To talk about an exploitative class, because these people, the wealth in the country has changed enormously. I went through the Fortune 400. There are no longer fortunes in assembly, manufacturing, mining, they are all investment, tech, insurance, media, speculation. And they're mostly, not all, but they're mostly on the left side of the ledger. So they have the added attraction of they're doing this for everybody. They're using the Soroses of the world are trying to help people. They're not the Rockefellers. They're not the J.P. Morgans. They're not the Robberborns. But when you look at the techniques, the monopolies or the attitude about extreme wealth or the use of wealth to generate what they think is we lab rats should follow, they have the exact same ethos or mindset. Only they have, and you mentioned hypocrisy. At least you could say of the 19th century captains of industry, the J.P. Morgans or the Guggenheims or whoever, that they were unapologetic. They said, we're building America. We've got to have railroads. We've got to have lights. We've got to have electricity. We're going to do it our way. People will benefit. I'm happy I made my money. It was up front. These people, well, I'm making all this money, but I'm not really rich. I wear, jeans and flip-flops and tie-dye shirts. I'm just one of you, and I'm using the money for good purposes. Oh, by the way, I have 5 homes and I have 2 Gulfstreams, and I'm living a life completely antithetical to the things I tell you to do.
So one of my favorite chapters in the New Testament is the 23rd chapter of Matthew, where Jesus goes on this tirade about the hypocrisy of the scribes and Pharisees, which are the religious order of the day. So Jesus says to his disciples and the crowds around him, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, they sit in Moses' seats. That's the judgment seat, more or less. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you to do, but don't do according to what they do. Do not practice what they do, because they don't practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves don't lift a finger to move them. Everything they do to be seen of people, more or less. They make their garments wide and adorn them with tassels, and they love to sit in the places of honor. They love the banquets. They love the reward ceremonies, I guess you might say, of the time. They love to sit in the important seats. They love to be greeted with respect and be, called teacher and master in the marketplaces. But he instructs his followers not to be like that, not to be a bunch of hypocrites, not to be all about self-promotion, and to actually practice the things that they preach. And I think it's important to keep Scripture in its context. He is writing to the first century, the generation that he lived in, addressing problems in that generation. But there's something that you can take away that's instructive to all generations, because human nature doesn't really change. People are people, and there's these sort of like personality types, and you can find the same kind of people in every generation. They might have a different label, they might have a different cause that they're championing, but there's hypocrites and play actors in every generation. And that's one of the big critiques of the left, is you'll have people like Al Gore or John Kerry. Al Gore, whose big cause was climate change, while he lives in a giant mansion that probably burns more energy in a month than my house burns in an entire year. And he flies around the world on private jets, preaching to the world about the dangers of catastrophic climate change. I don't believe in that narrative. Like, I do think the climate is changing, and I do think man is contributing to that. I don't think it's going to happen as fast as they say it is, and I don't think it's nothing that we won't be able to adapt to. It won't happen fast enough that it'll be the catastrophe that they're trying to paint. So I don't agree with their narrative, but even still, I would respect them more if they walked the walk. If you truly believe that the climate is on the verge of being catastrophically altered by mankind, well then, why aren't you living in a tiny house, that's powered by your personal solar panel and growing your food in your backyard? I mean, that would be the most eco-friendly way to live. And they're living the exact opposite lifestyle. They're flying around the world in private jets, living in mansions, buying beachfront property when supposedly they believe the sea levels are going to rise and flood everything. So as a thinking person, that tells me they don't really believe what they're saying. And even if they did, they're hypocrites. They're preaching one message and living another way. And that's why I argue that these people are out of touch. You could say the same thing about crime and criminal justice. The same people that want to defund the police because they erroneously believe, in my opinion, that policing is systemically racist in this country, which I think is a lot of baloney, but they want to defund the police that people in poor, crime-riddled communities, they need more police, if anything. They want to defund the police while they live in private communities and have private security that the poor people that they claim to care about can't afford. They don't want to enforce the law. They don't want to crack down on shoplifting. They don't want to even crack down on violent criminals who routinely get light sentences in major urban areas and get out of prison and offend again. So they're reluctant to enforce the law in the communities they don't have to live in. And it's really easy to have all these high and mighty ideas when you don't have to deal with any of the consequences. So you can come out and virtue signal, like those scribes and Pharisees, and not have to bear the burdens that you're piling on other people. And you could say the same thing about immigration policy. Democrats are so compassionate when illegals are coming across the border. They want to argue that no human is illegal, blah, blah, blah. But as soon as their cities and the places they live start getting overrun with illegals, suddenly then we have to do something about this. You saw a similar trend during COVID where states like California, where the lockdowns were extreme, all sorts of restrictions, championed by Governor Newsom. At the same time, while the rest of the state restaurants are shut down for inside dining, during this he's caught going to this fancy restaurant with lobbyists to celebrate some guy's birthday, some rich lobbyist's birthday. So as a thinking person, I know they don't believe what they're saying because I watch what they do. You could say the same thing about Obama, who threw himself a big birthday party during the pandemic. Hardly anybody was wearing a mask. Nancy Pelosi, while hair salons in California were shut down, she snuck into her favorite hair salon and got her hair cut. Well, if a normal person did that and got caught, they'd be fined or put in jail. So again, rules for thee, but not for me is sort of their creed.
I think that's starting.
Yeah,
I think
it's
they're pushing
funny.
back.
I'm in a different part of California than you. I'm just a little north of San Francisco, over in the Tiburon area, and most of my neighbors and friends up here are left of center. And I was at a dinner party the other night, and this exact conversation came up. And it was funny. Most of the people there still sort of rejected the idea that there was a giant bias in the media. They were still grudgingly, maybe there's some, but really the argument was it's not determinative of anything. And I said, well, let me ask you something. And well, we're all friends, so just be honest. If the former president that got shot at 8 times and got his ear clipped happened to have been Barack Obama, where would we be right now in the news cycle 3.5 weeks out? Would we be demanding, like, would the journalists that you watch on whatever channels you favor, would they just be moving on? Or would there be a giant demand for not just retribution throughout the Secret Service, local police, whatever, but we just got to get to the bottom of this. We have to understand it. And that actually landed everybody at the table because they were very supportive of that former president, said, well, yes, of course. And we would be right there encouraging those demands. And I said, well, that's my point, guys. It's why would you not encourage the same level of curiosity and diligence around the orange guy than the other guy? And there it is. And we had dessert and some wine and left friends, but I made my point. And, I wonder if you agree.
Yeah, I've had similar situations, although some of them have been more candid, and their candor kind of runs like this. But they're not the same, Victor, because Barack Obama was a sophisticated intellectual, the first African-American, and he was an iconic figure, and Donald Trump is an orange, shyster, overweight, slob, cruel. So, of course, we have to have different. And that attitude, I know it can be easily mocked, but that attitude is firmly entrenched on all these issues. And it gets back to what we talked about before. The left really does believe, either because they're more affluent now or they feel they're better credentialed, or they control most of the institutions, that was almost their birthright, or maybe most of them are not actively religious, but maybe there's some type of divine force that has bequeathed them those opportunities and success. But whatever the reason is, they feel that they have an entitlement to be hypocritical because they are morally superior and better educated than the rest of us. And so if they make a decision that isn't equally applicable to both sides, they just say, well, you've got a point, I am hypocritical, but on the other hand, you can't compare who I am or where I live or what I do or what my child does or what I think with you guys.
So those are some highlights from the interview that I thought were interesting. Actually, the whole interview is pretty good. If you want more brilliance from Victor Davis Hanson and Mike Rowe, you can find that interview on the Mike Rowe channel. It's this latest upload, the time of me making this video. I'll put a link in the description below. Those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments. You've been watching the Fletch Report. If you're hearing this, it means you've made it to the end of the video. But before you click onto the next thing and continue down whatever rabbit hole you're on YouTube or Rumble, I've got a small favor to ask. If you found value in my content and you want to help the channel out, the best thing you can do is share it with somebody else that you think will find value in it. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see more. Links to the channel on YouTube and Rumble will be provided below. Additionally, I'm making a Facebook page for the channel as well as a X/formerly Twitter. Feel free to follow me on those platforms as well. If you're feeling exceptionally generous, provided in the description below will be a link to Buy Me a Coffee, which is the online equivalent of a tip jar. Thanks for watching, and thanks for supporting the channel.